Hey everyone, and welcome. Ready to put on your detective hats? Because today we're traveling thousands of years into the past to uncover the amazing story of the very first people of Southern Africa. Think you've got what it takes? Let's dive in.
All right, for round one, we're going to get to know the people. We'll explore who the San and the Khoikhoi were and try to imagine what their day-to-day lives were like all those years ago. Here comes your first your first question.
Okay, first question up. Who were the very first people to call this beautiful land home? Take a moment, think about it. Got your answer? Okay, let's see what it is.
That's right, the San people. They were the first inhabitants, and they were what we call hunter-gatherers, which is a really fascinating way to live. Think about it. No grocery stores, no farms. They got everything they needed, food, medicine, materials for their homes, directly from the world around them.
Okay, on to the next one. So, in these hunter-gatherer communities, everyone had an important job, and the work was often divided. So, what do you think was the main role for the men in a San community?
You got it. The San men were famous for being incredible hunters. These guys could track animals for miles and were experts with a bow and arrow. They provided the community with meat, which was a really important source of food.
Okay, so if the men were the hunters, that brings us to our next question. What about the San women? What was their super important job?
Exactly. They gathered plants. And let me tell you, this was no small task. The San women were basically walking encyclopedias of plant life. They knew which roots, berries, and nuts were good to eat and which ones to avoid. Hunting could be a bit hit or miss, but their gathering brought in a steady supply of food for everyone. All right, last question for round one. History is never static. Things are always changing. So after the San had been living there for a long time, a different group of people arrived with a totally new lifestyle. Can you name them?
It was the Khoikhoi people. And here's the cool part. They lived in a completely different way. While the San were hunter-gatherers who followed wild animals, the Khoikhoi were herders. That means they brought their own livestock, like cattle and sheep, with them. It was a whole new way of living in that part of the world. Great job on round one.
You crushed round one. Welcome to round two, Clues from the Past. This is where we really put on our detective hats. Think about this. The San didn't write down their history in books, so how on earth do we know so much about them? What clues did they leave behind for us to find? Let's investigate. Okay, this one might make you think a little. If the San didn't have a written language, no books, no diaries, nothing like that, how do we piece their story together? What kinds of clues did they leave behind for us? See if you can name two. So how'd you do? If you named any two of these, give yourself a big pat on the back. We learned from their stories passed down from generation to generation, from the actual objects they made, what we call artifacts, their incredible rock art, books written by modern researchers, and even by respectfully observing and learning from San communities who are alive today.
So, speaking of researchers, these next two names are super important when it comes to San history. Have you ever heard of Wilhelm Bleek and Lucy Lloyd?
These two did something absolutely amazing. Way back in the 1870s, they realized that all these incredible oral stories might just disappear forever. So they spent time with San storytellers and carefully wrote down thousands of their myths and histories. Seriously, without them, a massive piece of this ancient culture would just be gone.
All right, let's talk about some of the different kinds of history detectives out there. First up, we have archaeologists. What are they looking for when they're carefully digging in the ground? Archaeologists are on the hunt for artifacts, physical things the people left behind. It could be anything, an arrowhead, a piece of a clay pot, maybe some jewelry. Each little piece is a clue that helps us understand what life was like for people long ago. Okay, let's talk about one of the most stunning clues the San left for us, something they are famous for all over the world. What exactly is rock art?
Rock art is the name for these amazing drawings and paintings that the San created on rock walls and inside caves. But there's so much more than just pretty pictures, They are literally windows into their world, showing us everything from their daily lives to their spiritual beliefs and the stories that mattered to them. All right, here's a big word for a really smart idea. Ethnography. Sounds complicated, right? But the concept is actually pretty simple. Any guesses what it might be?
So ethnography is kind of like learning about your great-great-grandparents by talking with your grandparents today. It's about learning from people who are alive right now to understand the traditions of their ancestors. It's a way of seeing how the past lives on in the present.
All right, here we are, the final question of the whole quiz. We've talked about a few different kinds of history detectives, but what about the people who try to put the entire human story together? What are anthropologists?
Think of anthropologists as the ones who look at the giant, finished puzzle. They take all the clues, the artifacts from archaeologists, the stories, the art, and they fit it all together. They study everything about us as humans, our cultures, our societies, how we live, both way back then and right now.
And you did it. Case closed. You made it through the whole quiz, which officially makes you a history expert. We've traveled back in time to meet the first people, figured out the difference between hunters and herders, and learned all the cool ways we can know about a time before written books. Awesome job!
So, I want to leave you with one last thing to think about. Just like those researchers saved the sand stories, imagine someone 1,000 years from now trying to learn about your life. What parts of your life would you want them to discover? What objects, pictures, or stories would you leave behind to tell them who you were? Something to think about, right? Thanks for being a history detective with me today.